in Esperance, not quite 50 k's northeast. It was interesting. One of the I've seen an article about this, and apparently Wongutha is a remote community, and I went, really? It's my community. It's 24 k's north of Esperance, 5 k's east of Gibson, and that's an important bit. This 5 k's east of Gibson, because that actually got us caught up into a lot more regs and process than we originally thought, but all good because it gave us some good experiences. So it's actually a boarding school for year 11, 12 Aboriginal students who come from all different remote communities in WA. They're not there, they have to actually apply to come to the school. It's actually quite highly contested, and it's to give them a whole pile of certificates through TAFE so they've got the work ready when they go back. There's about 75 students. Some of them are housed in dorms, and some are actually put into houses to get them to get some life skills and things like that. And it also supports about a dozen staff that live on site. So, as I said, we've been, with the old Ag Department badge down the bottom, we had been working for Wongutha for a long time on all sorts of issues, from salinity to water resources. This is an audit we did. Most of the water on the farm actually came out of really shallow bores in agricultural paddocks that we use for cropping and pasture. There was issues with the water quality, and there was a lot of competition, because what Wongutha did is they've sort of annexed the school, which is in this part. This is the actual school here. This is the farm, and they're actually taking farm water and using it at the school. And there was what they did is they leased out the agricultural land, and the leasee they escalated those issues between, you guys are using my water, no, it's our water, and things like that. And this is the water use was predominantly going through into the school. So the National Water Grid Connections project, it actually started under WaterSmart Farms, and then there was a lot of in-kind, and we leveraged money. And if you look at that lovely diagram on the table, you'll see where this project fits in. So really, it was Wongutha in partnership with us and Water Corp and Murdoch. We commenced the project in 21. This is Gibson's here. We're 5 kilometres out of Gibson. We actually fall within the old, which is still the current legislated proclaimed groundwater area. This is a new groundwater area, and it hasn't been proclaimed. I would have got out of some of the regs, but we had to get a whole pile of licenses to actually go and construct some wells. We did some exploration, because then I was in the groundwater area, had to provide a H1 report, which is basically a hydrogeological report saying where you're going to draw the water from, how much, what's the likely impacts on the groundwater area, and also the Gibson town site. Then we needed a licence to take water, and this is all done by Wongutha, but with our support. And then the notice of intent to discharge to the Commissioner's office to make sure, and that actually generated a lot more questions in that than what we did in the water licensing. System was designed based on what water we had, how much we wanted. Project completed, and a bit like the WaterSmart Dams projects, these projects finished. Then there's a legacy of continue on the monitoring, and I'm big on, with biophysical monitoring, 3 years doesn't cut it. You really want 5, 10 years. The more data, the more information, the better understanding we get of these systems. So it was mainly because we're in this groundwater area, even though we're outside of the drinking water protection area, we're actually within the groundwater area and the old thing. So we did actually have to apply for licenses, and thanks Water for being really patient with me, because originally it was 1 bore. We didn't find yield there. I put in another license for another 3 bores. I used the geology, tried to aim for fractures, failed. Had to go back for another license, and then I think they got so sick of me, they just said, just drill as many required and then come back to us when you find some water, please, John. So actually, these are regulatory sensitivities. So the school, Wongutha CAPS, is here, and right next door to it is some Kawongan, which is a TEC, a Threatened Ecological Community. So we had to show that what we're doing isn't going to impact on that. And as I said, so the first one was, well, what do we need to do to work out what this block of bush needed and what we needed. So thankfully, Tim, after I've done the drilling found the water, we then needed to do some drilling to deal with making our monitoring, making sure we weren't going to have a negative impact. So basically, we came through and we drilled a bore right in the corner here to make sure that when we're drawing from these bores and re-injecting into these bores, we're not going to have a negative impact. And what we found is this Quongan sort of sits on a different system than what we're drawing from. But we've actually put in, we repurposed a whole pile of equipment we used in another project, and we've instrumented this with loggers so we can see real time, making sure we're not going to have any impact on that threatened ecological community's water. But to give you an idea of the system, it's basically after, as I said, this was the first bore we drilled, we failed. We came down here, there's a fault fracture coming down through here, we failed there. There was another one in this corner, which was some good water, but it was a bit too close to some of the other infrastructure on the school. Eventually, we found it here, and then Wendell goes, oh, can you just move across? And we're worried about, making sure we had enough water. And we've actually punched a bore in between two of these, and Tim's put that in, and we've got a logger to actually see that we're not dewatering the aquifer and what impact. So we sort of did it doubled up there. And the other thing we've done is we've got the 3 reinjection bores designed by Richard, and then we've put a series of monitoring wells down from there. And this one here is equipped with a logger that not only measures water level, but also salinity. So we'll be able to, and the actual salinity of the water that we're putting back in here is less salt content than the water that's actually in the aquifer. So we'll be able to see if that salt content changes with that logger. And then we've got loggers here, and we've got loggers here. And we had to do the notice of intent, and I had to get him to sign off to say that he's happy about our proposal to re-inject water. But so in terms of the monitoring system, it's not just about monitoring water levels, salt content. We've actually got photo points at each of the re-injection sites. And as I said, we're logging the bore there to look at them. But the interesting one is the only thing that came up under the water licensing, the only question I really had was about the 3 threatened ecological community. These other 5 popped up as a response. So as part of our notice of intent to discharge process is the Department of Water, the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, and the local Shire all sent letters about the proposal and have they any objections to the proposal. And the letters came back, and the first one was, hang on, you're in a public drinking water source area. You show us that you're not going to affect the Gibson water supply 5 kilometres away. We showed that. The other one is, you're also in the groundwater area. This was a good one. We had to run a pipeline from the plant to these re-injection bores. We've got native vegetation there. So the question was, you're in a bushfire prone area, you've got to bury a pipeline. And the other one is we had to realign the pipeline so we didn't have to do any clearing. We just went along existing tracks. So instead of putting the pipeline straight through in the middle, we sort of came through out in and it comes across. Right, I'm not going to talk about the hydrogeology and the water quality and all that. I'll show you where we went from this. So this is the result. So we've got this plant, it's 50 kilolitres a day of feed water comes in. It's a 6% recovery rate to produce 30 kilolitres of fresh water. As part of the H1 report and also the report to the Commissioner, we did some mass balances on, and Wendell helped me. Thank you, Wendell, for doing the maths. In terms of what was coming in terms of quality, how much we're using, what the loads were coming out. This is Chris Nastami. He's actually the facilities manager. He's been pushing this unit a lot harder than what it was designed for. His recovery rates were phenomenal, but his water quality was that pure with having to put those salts back in so we don't have any adverse effects on the system. So how much did it cost? It's actually co-funded by the National Water Grid Authority and the state government. It was literally 50-50. I've only put the actual funding we've got. There was a lot of in-kind. Okay, but this is interesting. The RO unit was going to be grid fed. They're right, they have actually got Horizon Power going to the school. Horizon Power turned around to Wongutha and said, you're at your maximum we can produce, otherwise we have to change all the transmission lines out that way. You're not getting another, not sure what unit you'd put, another kilowatt of power. And And I was a bit worried for the school because I knew the costs of, the power requirements of these units. And it was really good that basically the project stumped up another 127,000. This is not just panels, these are batteries in the sea container. And that was, it was nearly as much as the RO unit itself. It was the auxiliaries that started coming up in terms of the labour. It does cost us a lot to get people to Esperance to build stuff. That's just tyranny of distance, 720 kilometres away from Perth. The drilling the pipelines, the tanks, that's the system there. You can see the sea container. What you can't see is right at the back, as part of the National Water Grid Authority, looking at what community good we can do other than just providing water to a community school, was a 300 kilolitre tank that sits on the roadside, that is there for firefighting purposes. And in the time of drought, we can, I wasn't keen for a standpipe to be there permanently because people get addicted to free water. So it's basically the fire, he's got the key, and it won't be opened unless there was a drought deficiency called. So in terms of the range of the day, I've just taken this straight out. Wendell provided me with some draft numbers. You remember that the last slide, farm 3 and 4 being right up the top, and quite expensive water because they're not working at the optimum, and they've got these solar sort of capital costs sitting in the back that they're not really seeming to utilise. So we are up that 950 a kilolitre, up that end of the scale. But I rang the water cartage guys. That was their last option they were looking at. If we ran out of water, they were having to go to the Esperance Scheme, and I assume it would be $8.50 a kilolitre out of the standpipe down there. This cost us, without the standpipe charges, it was $750 to get 10,000 litres up to Wongutha. So we're actually up to $30 a kilolitre as the alternative to getting this unit. So I think we're well and truly out in the front. And so what we've got left is really just watching the reject water. And and I said to Richard, how long do you want me to do this for? And he goes, when you're comfortable, John, that it's reached equilibrium. Oh, so I'll be there for another 5-10 years, imagine. We've actually got a monitoring strategy, thanks W Young Shire. Grabbed it straight from the W Young Shire. It was agreed by the commissioner. I thought, well, it was good for the W Young. So we basically grabbed that strategy and adapted it for the Wongutha with the photo points in there. And what I do like about these reinjection systems, if it does go pear-shaped, as you saw from Brad, we can flick it off. I'm already thinking of alternatives, what we could do if we can't put it in there. At the moment, there's been, after 2 years of operation, there's been no changes downstairs, which is really good. I did get a bit worried when I first saw there was a bit of bubbling next one of the bores, but I realised it was the bentonite hadn't wetted up and sealed off. But the bores are actually concreted to the top. And to date, we haven't seen. And the other one, the novel approach, is we're actually irrigating saltbush out there, just to see an alternative. And to be honest, we put the reject water on the saltbush in summer, and we use the groundwater reinjection system in winter. And the saltbush is loving it. It has actually really flourished down there. The only thing we found there is saltbush irrigation and kangaroos don't mix. It's their claws are just punching holes in a whole lot. But yeah, that's our story at Wongutha.